44 years after the death of Alexander the Great, his generals tore his empire apart with their bare hands. But the world Alexander made, the world of Greek thought, Roman ambition, Mediterranean civilization, that world kept going. It grew. It spread. It became something even Alexander could not have imagined. It became Rome. For 7 centuries, Rome was the answer to every question about power. Who controls the Mediterranean? Rome. Who builds the roads, the aqueducts, the law? Rome. Who do the barbarians fear? Rome. At the Battle of the Granicus, a 22-year-old king charged into a river and started reshaping the world. The civilization that eventually absorbed his legacy, that carried Greek thought into Roman concrete and Roman law, was supposed to be eternal. On August 9th, 378 AD, it found out it wasn't. This is the Battle of Adrianople. The day the Roman Empire learned that the future does not wait for empires to catch up. And nobody told you the full story. To understand Adrianople, you need to understand what Rome had become by the 4th century AD. The Rome of 378 AD is not the Rome of Julius Caesar, is not the Rome of Augustus. It is something older, heavier, more complicated, an empire so vast that one man cannot govern it, stretched across 3 million square miles from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. By this point, the empire has already been split administratively. Eastern and Western have sharing the burden of an increasingly impossible job. The army that once conquered the known world has evolved too. The legions of the early empire, disciplined heavy infantry who formed testudo formations and ground through enemies with mechanical precision, have given way to a more cavalry-heavy force, adapting to centuries of frontier warfare against fast-moving tribal opponents. The Roman military machine is still formidable, but it has changed. And change, in institutions that old, always carries risk. On the other side of the Danube River, something else has been changing. Something that Rome, distracted by its own internal politics, has almost entirely failed to notice. The Goths are moving. The Visigoths, the western branch of the Gothic peoples, have been living along the northern frontier of the Roman Empire for generations. They are not the primitive barbarian horde of Roman propaganda. By the 4th century, many Goths have converted to Christianity. Gothic leaders have served in Roman armies. Gothic traders cross the Danube regularly. The boundary between Roman and Gothic worlds is porous, complicated, and deeply human. But in the 370s AD, something happens that changes everything. From the east, out of the vast steppes of Central Asia, a new people arrives with terrifying speed and violence. The Huns. The Huns are unlike anything the Gothic world has encountered. Mounted warriors of extraordinary skill, fighting with composite bows from horseback, capable of covering distances that defy the logic of ancient warfare. They hit the Ostrogoths, the Eastern Goths, and they hit them so hard that the survivors flee westward in desperate panic. This panic collides directly with the Visigoths. And the Visigoths, now facing annihilation from the east, make a decision. They send representatives to the Roman Emperor Valens. They beg for permission to cross the Danube into Roman territory. In exchange, they offer military service. They offer their fighting men as soldiers for Rome. They offer to be useful. Valens agrees. This decision will destroy him. In 376 AD, somewhere between 80,000 and 200,000 Goths crossed the Danube into Roman territory. Men, women, children, elderly, animals, everything they own. Is one of the largest single movements of people in ancient history. And almost immediately, Rome betrays them. The Roman officials tasked with managing the Gothic settlement, men named Lipicinus and Maximus, are corrupt even by the low standards of late Roman provincial administration. They extort the Goths at every opportunity. They withhold the food supplies that were promised. Ancient sources record that Roman officials sold dog meat to starving Goths in exchange for Gothic children taken into slavery. The Goths are hungry. They are humiliated. They have been promised safety and received exploitation. And they are still armed because the Roman officials responsible for disarming them were too busy stealing from them to actually complete the process. In 377 AD, the situation boils over. A botched assassination attempt by Lipicinus at a banquet triggers open warfare. The Goths, led by a chieftain named Fritigern, rise against their Roman handlers and begin moving through the Roman Balkans, raiding, surviving, and growing as other displaced Gothic groups join them. For a year, Roman forces attempt to contain the rebellion without success. The Goths prove elusive, dangerous, and increasingly confident. By the summer of 378 AD, Emperor Valens has had enough. Valens is not a man history has been kind to. He is 50 years old in 378 AD. He came to power not through brilliance, but through the accident of being the brother of a more capable emperor, Valentinian I, who died in 375 AD and left the eastern half of the empire to his less talented sibling. Valens is not stupid. He is not cowardly. He has governed the Eastern Empire for over a decade and handled genuine military challenges before. But he is politically insecure, easily flattered, prone to the kind of decision-making that confuses speed with decisiveness. And in the summer of 378 AD, with the Goths ravaging the Balkans and his nephew Gratian, Western Emperor and a substantially better general, marching east with reinforcements, Valens faces a choice. Wait for Gratian. Let the combined Roman force deal with the Goths together with overwhelming numbers. Or attack now, before Gratian arrives, win the glory alone. His scouts report, incorrectly, as it turns out, that the Gothic force is approximately 10,000 warriors. Valens has perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 men with him. The odds look manageable. Valens chooses not to wait. This is the decision that kills him. And it kills Rome's sense of its own invincibility with him. The scouts were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The Gothic force outside Adrianople is not 10,000 warriors. Under Fritigern's leadership, with additional Gothic and Hunnic allied cavalry included, the actual force numbers somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000, and crucially, a substantial portion of that force is heavy Gothic cavalry. Mounted warriors who have spent years fighting the Huns and surviving. Experienced, desperate, and fighting for everything they have left. Fritigern knows his opponent. He has dealt with Romans long enough to understand their institutional arrogance, their tendency to underestimate Gothic military capacity, and the particular political vulnerability of an emperor who needs a victory before his co-emperor arrives to share the credit. So Fritigern does something elegant. He stalls. As Valens marches his army toward the Gothic wagon circle, the laager, a defensive formation of wagons arranged in a ring, Fritigern sends negotiators. He requests talks. He asks for conditions of peace. He expresses willingness to discuss terms. He is buying time. His cavalry, the heavy Gothic horse under commanders including Elafius and Saphrax, is out foraging, away from the main camp. He needs them back before the Romans attack. Valens, impatient and already committed, keeps his army standing in the summer heat. No water, no food since that morning. The August sun in the Balkans is not forgiving. Roman soldiers in full armor, standing and waiting, are burning through their energy before a single blow is struck. And then the Gothic cavalry returns. August 9th, 378 AD. Early afternoon, outside the city of Adrianople, in what is now northwestern Turkey. The Roman army advances on the Gothic wagon circle in a formation that is not quite ready, units arriving and deploying at different times, the coordination that Roman military doctrine requires beginning to fray before contact is even made. Fritigern's stalling has worked perfectly. The Roman army is tired, thirsty, disorganized, and attacking a prepared defensive position. The Gothic infantry inside the wagon circle begin to set fire to the surrounding grass. Smoke drifts across the Roman advance, obscuring vision, and adding to the confusion and discomfort of men already suffering in the August heat. Roman cavalry on the right wing, impatient or perhaps ordered forward prematurely, attacks the Gothic wagon circle before the infantry has fully deployed. They make initial contact. They appear to be making progress. And then the Gothic cavalry arrives. Elafius and Saphrax lead the returning Gothic horse, thousands of heavy cavalry who have been out on the plain, and now return to find a Roman army in the middle of attacking their people's camp. They do not hesitate. They crash into the Roman right-wing cavalry with devastating force. The Roman cavalry on the right disintegrates. They break and flee. What happens next is a tactical nightmare that Roman military doctrine was not designed to handle. With the Roman right-wing cavalry gone, the Gothic cavalry swings inward. They hit the exposed flank of the Roman infantry. Men who are already packed tightly together from the advance, their formation compressed, their ability to maneuver compromised by the sheer density of bodies around them. On the Roman left, a similar collapse occurs as Gothic pressure increases. The left-wing cavalry, also routed or driven off, leaves the infantry flanks naked. The Gothic infantry, which has been holding the wagons circle defensively, now surges forward. The Roman infantry finds itself pressed from the front by Gothic foot soldiers and hammered on both flanks, and eventually the rear by Gothic cavalry. This is encirclement. This is what happened to the Romans at Cannae 6 centuries earlier, when Hannibal's cavalry swung around and closed the trap. The Roman infantry at Adrianople finds itself in a compressing pocket. Men pushed so tightly together that soldiers cannot raise their weapons properly, cannot step back to deliver a blow, cannot maneuver. Ancient sources describe Roman soldiers so tightly packed that the dead could not fall. There was no room. Men died standing up, held in place by the press of bodies around them. The battle does not last long after this point. Perhaps 2 hours of actual fighting, but the results are catastrophic. Emperor Valens does not survive Adrianople. The exact circumstances of his death remain disputed by ancient sources, a detail that itself tells you something about how total the Roman collapse was. No one who was close enough to watch him die survived to give a clear account. One version, recorded by the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, who is a soldier himself and our most important source for this period, says that Valens was struck by an arrow and carried by his bodyguard to a nearby farmhouse. The farmhouse was then surrounded by Goths who, not knowing the emperor was inside, set it on fire. Valens burned to death. Another version says he died in the press of the battle itself. His body never recovered. What is certain is that his body was never found. A Roman emperor, the ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire, successor to a line of governance stretching back centuries, died at Adrianople and was buried without ceremony, without monument, without the state funeral that Roman tradition demanded. The army that died with him is almost equally staggering in scale. Ancient sources claim 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army was destroyed at Adrianople. Modern estimates suggest somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 Roman soldiers died in a single afternoon. Multiple senior commanders and high-ranking officers perished alongside the common soldiers. It is, by any measure, one of the worst military defeats in Roman history. Here is what matters about Adrianople beyond the body count. For centuries, the fundamental equation of Roman military power rested on the supremacy of disciplined, heavy infantry. The legion, the formation, the grinding, unstoppable advance of professional soldiers who had trained together, fought together, and trusted the man beside them with their lives. Cavalry was a supporting arm. Cavalry screened. Cavalry pursued. Cavalry protected flanks. But cavalry did not decide battles. Infantry decided battles. This was the lesson of centuries. This was the tactical truth that Roman military doctrine was built upon. Adrianople shattered that assumption. Heavy cavalry, properly used at the decisive moment on vulnerable flanks, could destroy an infantry army. Not just beat it, destroy it. The future of European warfare for the next 1,000 years would be written in the shadow of this lesson. The medieval world of armor knights, of cavalry, as the dominant arm of decision, has its roots in what happened outside Adrianople on August 9th, 378 AD. Rome never fully recovered from Adrianople in the way that matters most, not the physical recovery, because the empire continued for decades in the west and centuries in the east, but the psychological recovery. The certainty, the unquestioned assumption that Rome wins because Rome is Rome. That assumption died in a field outside Adrianople, with a missing emperor and 2/3 of an army. The new Eastern Emperor, Theodosius I, appointed after the catastrophe, faces an impossible situation. He cannot replace the soldiers lost at Adrianople quickly enough to risk another major battle. So he does something Rome would never have done before. He negotiates. He offers the Goths a formal settlement, land within Roman territory, autonomy, the right to live under their own laws and leaders. In exchange, they provide military service. It works in the short term, but the terms of that settlement represent something genuinely new in Roman history. The Goths who settle within Roman territory after Adrianople do not become Romans. They remain Goths. They serve Rome, but they are not of Rome. The boundary between empire and outsider, which had always been porous, has now been formalized on terms that favor the outsiders. The Western Roman Empire falls in 476 AD, approximately 100 years after Adrianople. Historians debate endlessly whether Adrianople caused the fall of Rome or simply accelerated an already declining trajectory. The honest answer is probably both, and neither. Empires do not fall for single reasons. They fall because enough things go wrong over enough time that the weight of failure exceeds the capacity to recover. But Adrianople is the moment when Rome stopped being the unquestionable answer. When the question, who controls the future, was opened back up. Read from Granicus. At the Granicus, a 22-year-old king charged into a river and proved that an empire, which seems invincible, is not. At Adrianople, 712 years later, a Gothic cavalry force crashed into Roman flanks and proved the same thing again. If this is the kind of history that hits you somewhere deeper than a textbook ever did, if you felt the weight of that field, that heat, that encirclement, then you already know where you belong. This is Untold Battlefield, where history bleeds truth. Subscribe, because the next story we tell might be the one that changes how you see the world.